welcome to this dive of Too Much and Never Enough. How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man by Mary L. Trump. The author, Donald Trump's only niece and a trained clinical psychologist, asserts that to understand what brought Donald and the country to the current point, we must start with her grandfather, Fred Trump Sr., and the legacy of darkness he created. Section 1. Fred Trump Sr., the sociopath and the architect of trauma. The core argument identifies Fred Trump Sr. as a high-functioning sociopath. Sociopathic symptoms include a facility for lying, a lack of empathy, and an indifference to right and wrong and the rights of others. Fred operated from a worldview that life was a zero-sum game. There could be only one winner, and everyone else was a loser. This worldview underpinned his rigid belief that kindness is weakness. The influence of Norman Vincent Peale reinforced Fred's beliefs that financial worth was the same as self-worth. This abusive environment ensured his children were isolated. The cruel dehumanization of people such as Donald, disparaging women as ugly, fat slobs, or men as losers, was commonplace at the Trump dinner table. Section 2. Mary McLeod's absence and Donald's early trauma. The household dysfunction was severely exacerbated by Mary Ann McLeod Trump, who, after Robert's birth, suffered postpartum complications, requiring an emergency hysterectomy. For 6 months, Mary was in and out of the hospital, leaving her physically and emotionally absent. This absence created a void, most dire for Donald, at 2.5, and Robert at 9 months. Fred refused to fill this void, believing dealing with young children was not his job. Any natural attachment behavior exhibited by the boys provoked Fred's anger or indifference. This was an experience of not enough for Donald, leaving him scarred for life. Donald developed powerful primitive defenses, marked by hostility and seeming indifference. Mary, meanwhile, became emotionally unavailable, sometimes found wandering the house like a soundless wraith, and failed to intervene when Donald tormented Robert. Section 3. Freddy's destruction. Fred was determined to make his oldest son, Freddy, into a killer. Freddy was temperamentally the opposite. Fred continually demoralized Freddy. Freddy sought refuge in flying, a transparent system of achievement, and reward the opposite of life with Fred. Joining TWA was viewed by Fred as a betrayal, and he launched a barrage of abuse, calling his son a bus driver in the sky. Donald, observing his brother's humiliation, learned that failure to comply was punished by public shame. Donald repeated their father's insults, calling Freddy nothing but a glorified bus driver. Freddy eventually quit TWA after facing a drinking problem ultimatum. Section 4. The heir apparent Donald's enabling. Donald's belligerence and aggressiveness served Fred's purpose, leading Fred to validate, encourage, and champion the things about Donald that rendered him essentially unlovable. Fred deliberately short-circuited Donald's ability to develop and experience the entire spectrum of human emotion. Donald became known as the Great I Am. When Freddy failed, Donald seized the opportunity. Donald secured a degree from the University of Pennsylvania by having a friend take his SATs. Donald secured his position as heir apparent, quickly receiving more perks and money than Freddy ever had. Donald's unearned confidence allowed him to portray a slick, superficial image as a self-made businessman. Despite being clandestinely funded by Fred, Fred desperately needed Donald to expand the empire into Manhattan and create the public brand Fred had always aspired to. Section 5. The illusion of success and the bailouts. Fred was intimately involved in Donald's early Manhattan forays, securing enormous tax abatements, such as the $10 million a year abatement for 40 years, secured for the Grand Hyatt. Donald received millions through loans he never repaid, and questionable consulting fees. Despite billions in debt from his Atlantic City casinos, the banks continued to support Donald because his name was the draw. Fred continually mitigated the damage, even sending his chauffeur. With over $3 million in cash to buy chips at Trump's castle in a quasi-legal scheme. When Donald missed a payment in 1990, the banks put him on a $450,000 a month personal allowance for having failed miserably. This cycle reinforced Donald's belief that he could claim that a failure is a tremendous victory, and the shameless grandiosity will retroactively make it so. Section 6. Freddy's final years and death. Freddy received the blame for the steeplechase development failure. His need for his father's approval intensified. When Freddy applied for a mortgage to buy a house, the application was rejected. The most plausible explanation being that Fred had intervened to trap his son in the apartment Fred owned. His drinking worsened. In 1967, his wife Linda begged Fred for help to fix a draft, making Freddy sick with pneumonia. Fred refused. In September 1981, Freddy had a heart attack and was taken to Queens Hospital Center. No family member accompanied him, nor did they use Fred's powerful connections to ensure he received the best care. While the author's mother sat alone with her grandparents, Donald and Elizabeth went to the movies. Freddy died that night at age 42. Section 7. The Inheritance and Betrayal. Freddy's death left 2 minor children, the author and Fritz, as trust fund beneficiaries. In 1990, Donald attempted to secretly seize complete control of Fred's estate via a codicil, but Fred refused to sign. Fred's rewritten will subsequently disinherited the author and her brother, dividing Freddy's 20% share among the 4 surviving children. Robert, acting as the point person, reminded them that Fred didn't give a shit about you, justifying the decision by claiming Fred hated their mother. Robert threatened that if they sued, "We will bankrupt Midland Associates." The family then revoked Fritz's son, William's medical insurance critical for his round-the-clock nursing care after severe seizures merely to cause them pain. Section 8. The lawsuit and the debacle. Fritz and the author were forced to launch a second lawsuit, just to reinstate William's insurance. Their lawyer defended the cancellation by calling the nurses overpriced babysitters. During depositions, Marianne referred to the author and Fritz as absentee grandchildren. Donald claimed strategic forgetfulness, saying he couldn't remember anything. Eventually, the author and Fritz settled. The settlement figure was based on allegedly suspect numbers, valuing Fred's estate at only $30 million, a fraction of its actual value. They were forced to sell their shares in inherited assets. Section 9. Unmasking the fraud. The New York Times expose. In 2017, motivated by watching democracy disintegrate, the author decided to help New York Times reporter Susan Craig retrieving copies of wills, depositions, and bank records. On October 2, 2018, the Times published an investigative article revealing fraudulent activities. This revealed Donald alone had received the equivalent of $418 million from Fred, much of it through untaxed gifts and unpaid loans. To avoid estate taxes, the 4 surviving siblings established all-county building supply and maintenance to siphon money from Trump management. The siblings sold the empire for $705.6 million in 2004. Leaving almost $300 million on the table, because Donald needed a massive cash infusion quickly due to his Atlantic City creditors. Section 10. Pathologies and the Presidential Stage. The author, a clinical psychologist, notes, Donald meets all 9 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder DSM-5. A case could also be made for antisocial personality disorder, sociopathy, or dependent personality disorder. The trauma of his youth means Donald is still, in essential ways, the same little boy, incapable of growing, learning, or evolving. His need for affirmation is a black hole of need, fueled by deep insecurity. The West Wing, like his previous institutions, is a controlled environment where others manage the work. The media treated his pathologies, his mendacity, his delusional grandiosity, as if they were entertaining idiosyncrasies. Conclusion: the cruelty is the point. Donald's failures have been consistently overlooked or rewarded, normalizing his behavior. His lack of fitness has widened into a disparity between the level of competence required for running a country and his incompetence. Powerful actors like Vladimir Putin and Mitch McConnell, who bear a passing psychological resemblance to Fred, recognized his vulnerability to manipulation. The author concludes that for Donald, the cruelty is the point. His cruelty serves as a distraction from his failures and as an exercise of power against those constrained by duty or dependence. His initial COVID-19 response was defined by minimizing negativity, fearing that acknowledging reality would indicate weakness. The country is now suffering from the same toxic positivity that my grandfather deployed. Ultimately, Donald's life is proof that nothing is ever enough. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.